The sound wasn't a clap, it was a crack, like a dry branch snapping in a dead forest. In the hallowed silence of Courtroom 4B, that sound stopped time. Everyone froze. The stenographer, the judge, the jury. Officer Derek "the Bull" Sterling, a man twice the size of the woman standing before him, grinned. He had just backhanded Nadia King, a sitting member of Parliament, across the face in open court. He thought his badge made him a god. He thought she would crumble. He was wrong. 2 seconds later, Sterling was on his back, eyes rolled into his head, twitching on the linoleum. Nadia hadn't just slapped him back, she had turned the lights out. But as the bailiffs swarmed her, the real war was only just beginning. The air in the Central Criminal Court, widely known as the Old Bailey, always smelled of old varnish, floor wax, and misery. On Tuesday, November 14th, the atmosphere was particularly suffocating. The heating system was rattling, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching winter chill. But inside Courtroom 4B, the temperature was rising for a different reason. Nadia King, the MP for Suffolk Central, sat in the front row of the public gallery. She wasn't there as a defendant, nor as a witness. She was there as an observer, keeping a promise to a constituent whose son had been a victim of police negligence. Nadia was 42, sharp-featured, with eyes that could cut glass, and a reputation that earned her the nickname, the Iron Lady of Suffolk. She wore a charcoal power suit that screamed authority, her hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. She sat with a straight spine, her notebook open, pen poised. Roaming the perimeter of the court like a shark in a fish tank was Officer Derek Sterling. Everyone knew Sterling. He was a relic of a bygone era of policing, a man who believed fear was the only currency that mattered. Standing 6'4" with a neck as thick as a tree stump, Sterling was known on the streets as the Bull. He had a dossier of complaints against him as thick as a Bible, ranging from excessive force to intimidation. But they always seemed to vanish before disciplinary hearings. The police union loved him. The public feared him. The tension began during a recess. The judge, the Honourable Justice Arthur P. Holloway, a man whose outdated views on authority were well known, had called a 10-minute break. Nadia stood up to stretch her legs, moving toward the aisle. Sterling, who had been eyeing her with disdain since she arrived, stepped directly into her path. It wasn't accidental. It was a block. "Excuse me, officer," Nadia said, her voice cool and level. "You're in my way." Sterling didn't move. He looked down at her, a smirk playing on his lips, chewing gum with an obnoxious, open-mouthed rhythm. "Gallery is closed, sweetheart. Sit down." "I am a member of Parliament, Officer Sterling," Nadia corrected him, her eyes locking onto his. "And the recess allows movement. Step aside." "I don't care if you're the Queen of Sheba," Sterling grunted, stepping closer, invading her personal space. His breath smelled of stale coffee and aggression. "In this room I'm the law, and I said, sit down." The courtroom was quiet, but eyes were darting toward the confrontation. A few reporters in the back row perked up, sensing blood. "I am leaving to make a call," Nadia said, attempting to step around him. Sterling's hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was bruising. "Don't you walk away when I'm talking to you." Nadia pulled her arm back, her voice rising so the room could hear. "Unwind your hand from me, officer. Now." "Or what?" Sterling laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "You gonna legislate me to death?" "I'm going to report you for assault," Nadia said, reaching for her phone. That was the trigger. Sterling, used to total submission, snapped. The audacity of this woman, this politician, challenging him in his domain, was too much. "Put the phone away," he roared. And then he did the unthinkable. With a sneer of contempt, he swung his right hand in a sharp, backhanded motion. Crack! It connected squarely with Nadia's cheekbone. The force of it staggered her. Her head whipped to the side. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. The court clerk covered her mouth. The reporters froze. For 1 second, there was absolute silence. Sterling stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for the tears, the cowering, the fear. Nadia King slowly turned her head back to face him. Her cheek was already turning a bright, angry red. But there were no tears in her eyes. There was only a cold calculation, a switch flipping from diplomat to warrior. What Sterling didn't know, what wasn't in his little mental file of her, was that before Nadia King was a politician, before she walked the halls of power, she had grown up in the roughest estate in South London, and she had spent 10 years training in Krav Maga to survive it. Sterling moved to grab her again. I said, he never finished the sentence. Nadia didn't wind up. She didn't telegraph. She pivoted on her heel, generating torque from her hips, and drove a precise, devastating hook straight into the button, the bundle of nerves on the jawline. It was a connection so clean, it sounded like a hammer hitting a wet sandbag. Sterling's eyes rolled back instantly. His legs turned to jelly. He didn't crumble. He fell like a cut tree, crashing backward onto the hard floor with a thud that shook the benches. He laid there, arms splayed, completely unconscious. Nadia stood over him, smoothing her blazer, her breathing controlled. She looked down at his motionless form, then up at the stunned courtroom. "The court," she said, her voice steady but ringing with steel, "is now in recess." The chaos that followed was immediate and overwhelming. "Caesar!" Judge Holloway bellowed from the bench, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his robes. "Bailiffs, arrest that woman!" 3 other officers who had been frozen in shock suddenly mobilized. They swarmed Nadia, tackling her with unnecessary force. They slammed her onto the table, handcuffing her behind her back as if she were a terrorist. "I am not resisting," Nadia shouted, her face pressed against the wood. "He assaulted me. It was self-defense." "Shut your mouth," one of the officers hissed, wrenching her arm up painfully. "You just assaulted a police officer in a court of law. You're done, lady. You are done." Within 20 minutes, Nadia King was in a holding cell in the basement of the courthouse. Her phone, her notebook, and her dignity were stripped away. She sat on the cold concrete bench, the adrenaline fading, replaced by the throbbing pain in her cheek where Sterling had struck her. Upstairs, the machine was already at work. This is where the story turns dark. The blue wall of silence isn't just a metaphor. It is a living, breathing organism. Officer Sterling was rushed to St. Thomas's Hospital. He had a mild concussion and a bruised ego, but by the time the police union representative, a man named Bill O'Reilly, no relation to the pundit, but just as loud, got to the press, Sterling was on life support. The media spin was dizzying. By 6 p.m., the headlines on the evening news were screaming, "Crazed MP attacks hero cop in courtroom meltdown." Violence in the Old Bailey. Nadia King snaps. The police released a statement. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It read, "During a routine recess, MP Nadia King became belligerent and aggressive. When Officer Sterling attempted to restrain her for the safety of the court, she launched an unprovoked and vicious assault, rendering the officer unconscious. Officer Sterling is currently in critical condition." Crucially, there was no mention of the slap. Why? Because the courtroom cameras, the official CCTV feeds, suddenly developed a technical glitch. Judge Holloway, protecting the sanctity of his court and his bailiff, ordered the record sealed immediately. The reporters present were pressured. They were told that if they reported unsubstantiated rumors about Sterling striking first, they would lose their press credentials for the Old Bailey forever. Most of them fell in line. It was the word of a decorated officer against a politician from a tough neighborhood. The narrative was easy to sell. She's from the streets, she's violent, she finally showed her true colors. Nadia was denied bail that night. She spent 24 hours in a cell, listening to the jeers of guards who walked by, dragging nightsticks across the bars. "Cop killer," one whispered. "You better watch your back in here, King." But outside, something was simmering. Nadia's lawyer was Simon Cross, a man who looked like a disheveled owl, but possessed the legal mind of a barracuda. He stood on the steps of the courthouse the next morning, facing a sea of microphones. "My client is being framed," Cross said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Officer Sterling struck first. Nadia King acted in self-defense, and we will prove it." The reporters laughed. "Do you have proof, Mr. Cross?" one shouted. "The police say the video is corrupted." Cross smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "The truth has a way of leaking out. Just you wait." Inside the jail, Nadia was brought into an interrogation room. Two detectives, Detective Miller and Detective Barnes, sat across from her. They didn't turn on the recording equipment. "Look, Nadia," Miller said, playing the good cop. "We know you're under a lot of stress. Politics is a dirty game. Just sign a statement saying you had a mental break. We'll get you into a nice clinic. Charges reduced to a misdemeanor. You resign, and this all goes away." Nadia leaned forward, the handcuffs clinking against the table. The bruise on her cheek was now a dark purple, a stark contrast to her pale skin. "I will not resign," she whispered, "and I will not sign your lies. I'm going to take this to trial, and when I do, I'm going to burn your entire corrupt house down." Barnes slammed his fist on the table. "You're facing 10 years for assault on a police officer causing bodily harm. You think a jury is going to believe you over a man in uniform?" "I think," Nadia said, "that you underestimate how many people have been waiting for someone to knock Derek Sterling out." 3 days passed. Nadia was eventually granted bail, but the conditions were severe: house arrest, surrender of passport, and a gag order preventing her from speaking to the press about the case. She was trapped in her apartment, watching her career disintegrate on television. Pundits were calling for her resignation. Her own party was distancing themselves, calling the incident regrettable and disturbing. She felt alone, but she wasn't. In a small, clutter-filled apartment in East London, a 19-year-old paralegal named Toby Finch was looking at a laptop screen. Toby had been in the courtroom that day, sitting in the back row, hidden behind a pillar. He wasn't a reporter. He was just a law student observing procedures, and he had been recording a voice memo on his phone to study the judge's speech patterns. When the incident happened, he hadn't just captured audio. In the chaos, he had lifted his phone and snagged exactly 4 seconds of video through the gap in the seats before he ducked down. He saw the news. He saw the lies. He saw the police statement claiming unprovoked aggression. Toby was terrified. If he released the video, the police would come for him. He knew who Sterling was. He knew what happened to people who crossed the precinct. He sat on the video for 3 days, sweating, unable to sleep. On the 4th night, he received an encrypted message on a forum he frequented. It was from a user named Justicia Zero. "We know someone in the gallery has an angle. The official feed was wiped. If you have it, drop it here. We will protect your ID." Toby hesitated. Then, with a shaking hand, he uploaded the file. 12 hours later, the internet broke. The video was grainy, shaky, and vertical, but the audio was crisp. "Put the phone away." Then, the visual cleared just in time to show Sterling's massive hand swinging back, The sound of the slap, crack, was unmistakable. The video showed Nadia's head snapping back. It showed Sterling stepping in, and it showed the knockout punch. It was titled, "Bully Down, the Real Tape." It hit Twitter at 2 a.m. By 8 a.m. it had 40 million views. The narrative didn't just shift, it capsized. The comment sections went from "lock her up" to "she knocked him into next week" and "self-defense." Hashtags like "a just stand with Nadia" and "the slap heard round the world" began trending globally. But the police weren't done. The morning the video leaked, Simon Cross received a phone call. It wasn't from the DA, it was from an anonymous number. "Tell your client to take the plea deal today," a distorted voice said, "or we release the file on her brother." Nadia's brother, Liam, had been a recovering addict for 5 years. He was clean, working a steady job. But the police had evidence, planted or real, it didn't matter, that could send him away for distribution. Nadia sat in her living room with Simon. "They're threatening Liam," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "If I fight this, they destroy him." Simon Cross took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Nadia, if you fold now, Sterling walks. He gets a medal. And you become a felon. They are terrified. That video changed the game, but they still control the board. We need something more than just the video. We need to destroy his credibility completely." "How?" Nadia asked. "The judge sealed his records." "I know a woman," Simon said, lowering his voice. "An investigative journalist named Sarah O'Connell. She's been tracking Sterling for years. She has the ghost file." "The what?" "The file of every complaint, every settlement, every beaten suspect that the department paid off to keep quiet. It's never been admissible in court because Judge Holloway always blocks it. But if we can get it into the public record, if we can get it in front of the jury—" "How do we do that if the judge blocks it?" Simon looked at her, a glimmer of rebellion in his eyes. "We don't get the judge to admit it. We get Sterling to admit it. He'll never admit to it. He lies as easily as he breathes." "He does," Simon agreed. "But every bully has a weakness. Sterling's weakness is his vanity. He thinks he's untouchable. We're going to use that. We're going to bait the trap." The trial was set for 2 weeks later. It was fast-tracked, presumably so the city could bury Nadia before the public support grew any louder. It was billed as the trial of the decade. But as Nadia prepared for court, a brick crashed through her living room window. Wrapped around it was a note. "Last warning." Nadia picked up the brick. She looked at the glass shattering on her floor. She thought of Sterling's smirk. She thought of her brother. She dialed Simon. "I'm not taking the deal," she said. "Let's go to war." The day of the trial, the streets outside the Old Bailey looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a war zone. Barricades held back 2 distinct crowds. On the left, the Blue Lives Matter contingent, waving flags and holding placards that read, "Protect our protectors and lock her up." On the right, a massive swelling tide of supporters for Nadia, wearing T-shirts emblazoned with the frame of the video where her fist connected with Sterling's jaw. They chanted, "Hands off Nadia!" Inside, Courtroom 1 was packed to the rafters. The air conditioning was working this time, but the atmosphere was still stifling. Judge Holloway sat on the bench, looking down with the expression of a man who had already written his verdict. He had denied the defense's motion to recuse him, stating there was no evidence of bias, despite him having attended the police union's Christmas gala 3 years running. The prosecutor was Leonard Graves, a man known in legal circles as the Mortician. He was tall, gaunt, and spoke in a monotone drone that lulled juries into submission before he snapped the trap shut. He was the establishment's cleaner, Nadia sat at the defense table, Simon Cross beside her. She looked tired but focused. She wore white, a strategic choice by Simon to subliminally suggest innocence. Graves began his opening statement. He didn't shout, he didn't pace. He stood perfectly still. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Graves droned, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "This case is not about politics. It is not about gender. It is about order. We live in a society governed by laws. When a citizen, no matter how powerful, decides to take the law into her own hands and brutally assault a uniformed officer of the Crown inside a court of justice, that is not self-defense. That is anarchy." He pointed a skeletal finger at Nadia. Ms. King didn't just slap an officer. She utilized military-grade combat training to inflict severe bodily harm on a public servant who was merely trying to maintain order. We will show that Officer Sterling was acting within the scope of his duties, and that Ms. King, fueled by entitlement and rage, snapped. The jury, a mix of 12 Londoners who looked terrified to be there, nodded along. Graves was good. He made the lie sound boringly inevitable. Then came the witnesses. First, the court clerk who had covered her mouth. She testified nervously. I saw Officer Sterling approach her. He seemed calm. Then there was a scuffle. And then she hit him. It was very violent. "Did you see Officer Sterling strike her?" Graves asked. I couldn't see that angle clearly. It happened so fast." Cross declined to cross-examine her. He knew she was just frightened. Then, the main event. "The prosecution calls Officer Derek Sterling." The doors opened and Sterling walked in. The theatre was impressive. He was wearing his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. But the pièce de résistance was the soft, foam neck brace he wore, and the slight, exaggerated limp. He took the stand, grimacing as he sat down, playing the wounded hero to perfection. Graves walked him through the official version of events. "Officer Sterling, walk us through the moment of the assault." Sterling cleared his throat, looking at the jury with puppy-dog eyes. "Well, sir, I saw the defendant trying to push past the bailiff station. That's a restricted area during recess. I stepped in to verbally correct her. She became irate. She started screaming about her rights. I put a hand up, just to create distance, a de-escalation tactic, and she grabbed my arm. I pulled away, and the next thing I knew, the lights went out." "Did you slap her?" Graves asked. "Absolutely not," Sterling said, looking shocked. "I would never strike a woman. I've been on the force for 15 years. My record is spotless." Nadia clenched her jaw so hard she thought a tooth might crack. "Thank you, officer," Graves said, sitting down with a satisfied smirk. It was Simon Cross's turn. Simon stood up slowly. He didn't look like a high-powered barrister. He looked like a confused geography teacher. His tie was slightly askew. He shuffled his papers, dropping one on the floor and scrambling to pick it up. The jury chuckled. Sterling smirked. "This guy is a clown," Sterling thought. "Officer Sterling," Simon began, voice trembling slightly. You said your record is spotless?" "That's right," Sterling said, leaning back. "And you consider yourself a patient man." "You have to be, in this job," Sterling quipped. A few jurors smiled. Yes, quite," Simon mumbled. "And you said you used a de-escalation tactic, putting your hand up." "Standard procedure." "Right. And you testified just now that you would never strike a woman. That violence is abhorrent to you unless absolutely necessary." "That is correct." Simon paused. He looked at his notes. Then he looked at the judge, then back to Sterling. The bumbling demeanor suddenly evaporated. Simon's posture straightened. His eyes, previously darting around, locked onto Sterling like a laser guidance system. "So," Simon's voice dropped an octave, becoming clear and resonant. "If I were to suggest that you have a history of losing your temper and assaulting civilians when you feel disrespected, that would be a lie." Graves stood up. "Objection. Relevance. Character evidence is inadmissible unless—" "Goes to credibility, Your Honor," Simon shot back. "The witness just claimed a spotless record and a specific character trait of non-violence. He opened the door. I have the right to test that claim." Judge Holloway looked annoyed. He wanted to sustain the objection. But legally, Simon was right. Sterling had bragged about his record. He had opened the door. "Overruled," Holloway grunted. "But tread carefully, Mr. Cross." Simon smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Officer Sterling," Simon said, walking to the middle of the room, "you said you would never strike a woman. Do you know a woman named Beatrice Galloway?" Sterling's left eye twitched, just a fraction. But Simon saw it. I don't recall the name," Sterling lied. "Really?" Simon picked up a piece of paper. "November 14th, 2018. A traffic stop in Hackney. Miss Galloway, a 62-year-old grandmother, asked for your badge number. You dragged her out of her car and dislocated her shoulder. The department settled for $40,000. Do you recall that?" "Objection," Graves shouted. "That settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, which applies to the parties, not to a criminal court of law where the witness has perjured himself regarding his record," Simon roared back. "I didn't admit fault," Sterling shouted from the stand, breaking his calm facade. "The city paid her to shut her up. She was resisting." "Ah," Simon said softly. "She was resisting." "Like Ms. King was resisting?" "Yes. Let's move on," Simon said, pacing. "How about Thomas Elway, 2020? You broke his jaw outside a pub while you were off duty. No charges filed. Why? Because the CCTV hard drive at the pub mysteriously vanished. Sound familiar?" Sterling's face was turning red. The neck brace seemed to be choking him. "He attacked me. It was self-defense." "Everything is self-defense with you, isn't it, Derek?" Simon dropped the officer. "Tell me, in the video of the incident with Ms. King, the one the world has seen, we hear a crack. We see her head snap back. If you didn't hit her, what was that? Did the wind slap her?" "The video is manipulated," Sterling spat. "Deep fakes. Everyone knows you can fake anything now." "Okay," Simon said. He walked back to the defense table and picked up a heavy, sealed envelope. He held it up. "Officer Sterling, are you aware that Ms. King's team hired a digital forensics expert, a man named Dr. Aris Thorne, formerly of MI5? He analyzed the raw file uploaded by the witness. He verified the metadata, but that's not what this envelope is." The courtroom went deadly silent. "What is that?" Judge Holloway asked, leaning forward. Simon turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution claims the courtroom CCTV malfunctioned. However, the IT technician responsible for the server maintenance at the Old Bailey, a Mr. Gary Sykes, seems to have kept a backup log. He was worried about job security." Simon looked at Sterling. Sterling had gone pale. "Mr. Sykes was subpoenaed this morning. He provided this drive. It contains the continuous, uncorrupted feed from camera 4, the one directly above the gallery." Graves looked like he was going to vomit. He hadn't known. The police had told him the footage was gone. They lied to the prosecutor, too. "We have not viewed it yet," Simon lied. "We wanted to view it together. With the jury." "Objection," Graves squeaked. "Authentication." "Mr. Sykes is outside," Simon said calmly. Judge Holloway looked at the envelope. He looked at the sweating police officer. He looked at the press in the gallery. If he blocked this, and it leaked later, his career was over. "Call Mr. Sykes," the judge said. The video was played on the large screens mounted on the walls. It was high definition, crystal clear. It showed the whole thing, Sterling blocking the path, the sneer, the aggression. It showed Nadia trying to walk away, and then, in 4K resolution, it showed Derek Sterling wind up and backhand a member of Parliament across the face with the full weight of his body. The sound on the video was low, but the visual was undeniable. Then, it showed the knockout. But it showed something else. After Nadia was tackled and handcuffed, while Sterling was lying on the floor, the video showed another officer, Officer Griggs, kneel down beside Sterling. Sterling opened his eyes. He was groggy, but awake. Griggs whispered something. Sterling nodded. Then Sterling closed his eyes and went limp again, playing dead. The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, thick, and suffocating. Simon Cross turned to Sterling. "You weren't unconscious for 20 minutes, were you? You were awake when they were arresting her. You faked the severity of your injury to justify the assault charge." Sterling sat frozen. The hero cop mask had dissolved, leaving behind a terrified bully. I was disoriented," Sterling stammered. "You are a liar," Simon said, his voice ringing like a bell. "You lied about the slap. You lied about your record. You lied about your injuries. And you lied to this jury." Simon turned to the jury box. "No further questions." The courtroom erupted. Judge Holloway banged his gavel, but it was useless. The blue wall had just collapsed on live television. But the twist wasn't over. As the court went into recess, chaos broke out in the corridors. Nadia was being hustled into a conference room by Simon. "We won," she said, breathlessly. "Simon, we won." "Not yet," Simon said, looking at his phone. His face was ashen. "Nadia, where is Liam?" "He's at the safe house. You sent him there." "I just got a text from the private security detail I hired," Simon said. "They're not answering." Nadia's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The police knew we had the Sykes footage," Simon said, realization dawning on him. "They knew Sykes was subpoenaed this morning. They couldn't stop the court, so they went for the leverage." Nadia grabbed his lapels. "Simon, where is my brother?" At that moment, Nadia's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered. "Ms. King," a voice said. It was distorted, mechanical. "That was a very compelling performance in court, but actions have consequences." "If you touch him," Nadia hissed, "I will kill you." "Liam has been arrested," the voice said. "Not by the Met, by a specialized task force. They found 5 kilos of heroin in his apartment. He's currently being processed at Belmarsh. He'll be in general population in an hour. You know what happens to a soft kid like Liam in Belmarsh, don't you? Especially when the guards know he's your brother." Nadia felt the room spin. Belmarsh was a maximum security prison. It was a shark tank. "What do you want?" "You plead guilty. You enter the court after recess, you fire your lawyer, and you change your plea. You say the video was doctored. You say you provoked him. You take the 5 years. And if I don't? Then Liam hangs himself in his cell tonight. A tragic overdose. Or maybe a fight. Prisons are dangerous places." The line went dead. Nadia dropped the phone. She looked at Simon. "They planted drugs. They have him at Belmarsh. They want me to plead guilty." Simon paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "It's a bluff. They can't get him into Gen Pop that fast. There's processing, intake." "Simon, they are the police!" Nadia screamed. "They can do whatever they want. He's in there right now." She looked at the door. The recess was ending in 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes to decide between her freedom and her brother's life. She straightened her jacket. The fire in her eyes died, replaced by a dull, grey resolve. "I have to do it," she whispered. "No," Simon said. "Nadia, if you do this, Sterling wins. The corruption wins. You destroy everything." "He's my brother, Simon. He's the only family I have." Nadia walked toward the door. She was going to surrender. She was going to walk back into that courtroom and lie to save Liam. She put her hand on the doorknob. Suddenly the door flew open from the outside. It was Sarah O'Connell, the investigative journalist. She was out of breath, her red hair wild, holding a tablet. "Don't go in there," Sarah yelled. "Sarah, get out of my way," Nadia said. "I have to—" "No, listen to me." Sarah shoved the tablet into Nadia's hands. "Look at this. It's trending. It's everywhere." Nadia looked at the screen. It was a live stream. It wasn't from the news. It was from Instagram Live. The account belonged to a rapper named Chaos, a local grime artist who was huge in South London. The video showed Chaos standing on the hood of a car outside Belmarsh prison. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 300 men. Not protesters. These were the streets. There were gang members, local toughs, construction workers, and regular citizens. They had surrounded the police transport van that was trying to enter the prison gates. "Yo!" Chaos shouted into his phone. "They trying to bring Liam King in here on some fake charge. We ain't having it. We got the receipts. We saw the trial. Suffolk is closed today, officers. You ain't getting through." The camera panned. The police van was completely blocked by a wall of people. The officers inside looked terrified. They couldn't move forward without running people over, and there were too many cameras. "We got him," Sarah said, pointing at the screen. "Nadia, the people blocked the transport. The police can't get him into the prison. They're stuck outside the gates. The press is already helicoptering in. They can't touch him now. The whole world is watching." Nadia stared at the screen. Tears streamed down her face. She touched the image of the crowd, her constituents, the people she had fought for, the people the police thought were trash. They had come for her. "They blocked the van," Nadia whispered. "They saved him," Simon said, a grin breaking across his face. "The leverage is gone." Nadia wiped her face. The fire came back. It burned hotter than before. "Okay," she said. "Let's go finish this." Nadia King walked back into Courtroom 1, but it felt like walking into a different world. The suffocating tension of the morning had evaporated, replaced by a buzzing, electric energy that vibrated off the wood-panelled walls. The news from Belmarsh had travelled faster than any official court transcript. Every reporter in the gallery was glued to their phone, whispering furiously. The jurors, who had been sequestered from the specifics but could sense the shift in the air, looked restless, their eyes darting between the defense table and the prosecution. Derek Sterling sat at the prosecution table, but the arrogance that had defined his posture for the entire trial was gone. He was hunched over, his massive frame seemingly shrinking inside his dress uniform. He was sweating profusely, a dark stain spreading under the arms of his crisp blue shirt. He was whispering angrily to his union representative, Bill O'Reilly, whose face had gone a pale, sickly shade of grey. Even the bull knew when the herd was turning. Judge Holloway took the bench. He looked rattled. His usually booming voice was thin as he addressed the room. He banged his gavel, not with authority, but with a hurried desperation to regain control of a train that was rapidly jumping the tracks. "Order," Holloway said. "We are ready to proceed with closing arguments. Mr. Graves, you may begin." Leonard Graves, the prosecutor, stood up. He looked exhausted. He shuffled his papers, preparing to deliver a speech he no longer believed in. "Actually, Your Honor," Simon Cross's voice cut through the room. It wasn't loud, but it had the clarity of a bell. He stood up, buttoning his rumpled suit jacket with a newfound precision. "The defense has a motion." Graves spun around, his eyes wide. Objection. They rested their case. We are in the closing phase. In light of the authenticated video footage from Mr. Sykes, Simon continued, ignoring Graves and addressing the judge directly, and the subsequent revelations regarding the integrity of the prosecution's evidence, a new witness has come forward. A witness who can speak directly to the defendant's state of mind and his history of record-keeping. This is highly irregular, Judge Holloway snapped, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity. Who is this witness, Mr. Cross? And why should I allow this circus to continue? The witness is here, Your Honor, Simon said, gesturing to the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. And I believe her testimony is essential to the administration of justice. The doors swung open. The room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the light fixtures. A woman walked in. She was small, frail, and elderly, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone in pain. She leaned heavily on a wooden cane, the tap-tap-tap of it against the floor echoing like a metronome. She wore a modest, floral print coat and a hat that had seen better days. She looked like anyone's grandmother, soft, harmless, and kind. But when Derek Sterling turned around and saw her, the blood drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure melting under heat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. "Mum," he finally choked out, the word small and terrified. "Mum, what are you doing here?" A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The press corps nearly fell over themselves, leaning forward. "Mrs. Martha Sterling," Simon announced to the stunned room. Sterling stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mum, you can't be here. Go home. Someone get her out of here." "Sit down, Derek." The voice didn't sound frail. It cracked like a whip across the courtroom. It was the voice of a matriarch, the voice of a woman who had raised a son and was now watching him destroy everything she valued. The bull sat. He shrank back into his chair, looking for the first time like a scolded child. Mrs. Sterling made her way to the witness stand. The bailiff, looking unsure of himself, helped her up the steps. She didn't look at the jury. She didn't look at the judge. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on her son. Her expression wasn't one of hate, but of a deep, crushing disappointment. "Mrs. Sterling," Simon began, his voice gentle. "You contacted my office regarding this case just 20 minutes ago. Can you tell the court why?" Mrs. Sterling adjusted her glasses. Her hands were shaking, but she clasped them together on her lap to steady them. "Because I raised him better than this," she said. Her voice wavered, then strengthened. "I sat in my living room and I watched the news. I saw him lie on that stand. I saw him hit that woman in the video, and I saw him smiling about it." She took a deep breath. "My husband, Derek's father, he was a police officer too. A good one. He never raised a hand in anger. He believed the badge meant something." She looked at Derek, tears welling in her eyes. "You shamed him, Derek. You shamed our family. You shamed your father's memory." "Mrs. Sterling," Simon pressed gently. "You mentioned something on the phone. A notebook?" Mrs. Sterling nodded. She reached into her worn leather handbag and pulled out a small, black notebook. It was battered, the corners frayed, the spine taped together. It looked innocuous, but the way Derek Sterling stared at it suggested it was radioactive. "Derek has a temper," she told the jury, her voice sad. "He always has. But he's also proud. He keeps a log. He calls it his scorecard. He brags about it at Sunday dinner sometimes, thinks it's funny. He thinks he's winning a game." "Mum, don't!" Sterling pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please! Shut up, Derek!" she yelled back, slamming her hand on the railing. "You are done lying!" She turned to the bailiff and handed him the book. It's all in there. He left it at my house last weekend after Sunday roast. The names, the dates, the bribes he took, the evidence he planted, the people he hurt. He writes it down because he wants to remember how powerful he is. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Graves had his head in his hands, realizing his career was likely over by association. Judge Holloway was banging his gavel furiously, his face purple. But nobody was listening. Simon Cross took the notebook from the bailiff. He held it up, a small black object that contained the ruin of 12 lives. "Your Honor," Simon said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I would like to read an entry into the record." "Mr. Cross," the judge started. "April 4th, Simon read loud and clear. "Planted 4 grams of coke on the kid from the corner store. Little punk disrespected me. Easy bust." He flipped a few pages forward. "June 12th, slapped the bartender at the Crown, deleted the tape from the back room, paid the manager $500 to wipe the drive. No face, no case." Simon closed the book with a snap. He looked at Sterling. The officer was weeping now, not the fake, staged tears of the victim he had played earlier, but the ugly, heaving sobs of a man whose entire life had just been dismantled by the one person he couldn't intimidate. "No further questions," Simon said. The jury didn't wait for instructions. They didn't ask to retire to the deliberation room. They looked at each other. 12 ordinary citizens who had seen enough. The foreman, a middle-aged man who worked in construction, stood up before the judge could even dismiss them. "Your Honor," the foreman said, his voice shaking with anger. "We don't need to deliberate. We've seen enough. We find the defendant, Nadia King, not guilty." The roar that went up from the gallery was deafening. It wasn't just a cheer. It was a release of tension that had been building for weeks. People were hugging. The press was sprinting for the doors. "And," the foreman continued, raising his voice over the din, pointing a finger directly at Sterling, "we would like to recommend, no, we demand, that the district attorney immediately arrest Officer Sterling for perjury, assault, and perverting the course of justice. He is a criminal." Judge Holloway looked at the crowd. He looked at the camera feeds that were broadcasting this live to the nation. He knew he had no choice. "Ms. King," Holloway said, his voice defeated, "you are free to go. The charges are dismissed with prejudice." He turned to the bailiffs, the same ones who had tackled Nadia just weeks ago. "Bailiff, take Mr. Sterling into custody." The room went silent as the bailiffs approached their former colleague. They didn't look him in the eye. They pulled his arms behind his back, rougher than necessary, and slapped the handcuffs on. The metallic click-click of the cuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Sterling looked up as he was hauled to his feet. He looked at his mother, who had turned her face away, unable to watch. Then he looked at Nadia. Nadia stood up. She smoothed her white blazer. She walked over to the railing where Sterling was being held. Sterling looked at her, his eyes red and swollen, expecting her to gloat. He expected insults. He expected her to spit on him. Nadia just looked at him with a cold, pitying stare. "You underestimated us," she said softly, her voice only for him. "You thought you were the law. You thought the badge made you a god. But you were just a bully, and bullies always fall hard." She didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on him, picked up her briefcase, and walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. As she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the blinding sunlight of the London afternoon, she didn't look back. The nightmare was over. The bull had fallen. The descent of Derek the Bull, Sterling, was not a gradual slide into obscurity. It was a sheer, vertical drop into a concrete abyss, a dismantling so complete that it seemed almost biblical in its severity. The day after the verdict was read in the Old Bailey, the vaunted blue wall of silence, that unspoken code that had protected men like Sterling for decades, didn't just develop hairline fractures, it disintegrated. The public outcry, fueled by the viral video of the slap and the exposure of the ghost file, was a tidal wave that the establishment could not hold back. The police commissioner, a man who had survived 4 different prime ministers, was forced to resign within 48 hours, his career ending in a hastily arranged press conference where he refused to take questions. Judge Holloway, realizing the winds had shifted and that an inquiry into his conduct was inevitable, announced an immediate medical retirement. He cited stress, packing his office in the dead of night. But the city knew the truth. He was jumping before he was pushed. But the true, visceral reckoning, the dark, poetic justice that the public craved, didn't happen in the press or the corridors of power. It unfolded inside the bleak, grey walls of HMP Belmarsh. Derek Sterling was denied bail pending his sentencing. The judge, a new appointee brought in to clean up the mess, ruled that the flight risk was substantial and, ironically, that Sterling's own safety could not be guaranteed on the streets of London. He was processed into the prison system at 4:00 p.m. on a Friday, the start of the weekend shift when staffing was lowest and tensions were highest. Standard procedure for a former police officer dictates immediate placement in the Vulnerable Prisoners Unit, VP, often referred to as the pouch or the bacon slicer. This is a protective custody wing designed to separate targets, child abusers, snitches, and ex-cops from the general population who would kill them given half a chance. It is a grim existence, but it is safe. However, in a twist of fate that some called bureaucratic incompetence and others whispered was a deliberate act of karma by an intake clerk who had watched the trial, a critical error occurred. On Sterling's intake form, the box marked Law Enforcement, High Risk was left unchecked. Derek Sterling was assigned to Wing B, Level 2. General population. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Wing B was not just any cell block. Among the inmates, it was colloquially known as Sterling's Wing. Over his 15-year reign of terror, Derek Sterling had personally arrested, framed, or beaten at least 40 of the men currently housed in that specific block. He had planted evidence on them. He had coerced confessions. He had mocked their families in the courtroom. As the heavy steel automated door slid shut behind him with a final, echoing clank, the ambient noise of the tier, the shouting, the music, the clatter of dominoes, dropped to absolute zero. Sterling stood at the edge of the gangway, clutching his thin, rolled-up mattress and a clear plastic bag containing a toothbrush and a bar of soap. He wore the grey prison tracksuit that was 2 sizes too small for his bulk. For the first time in his life, the badge was gone. The uniform was gone. The gun was gone. He was just a man, and a frightened one at that. He looked up toward the 3rd tier, leaning over the railing, staring down with a predator's intensity, was Thomas Elway. Elway was the man whose jaw Sterling had broken outside a pub in 2020. The man whose assault complaint had disappeared along with the CCTV footage. Sterling's eyes darted to the left. There, standing by the hot water dispenser, was Marcus Tiny Reed, a man Sterling had planted a knife on during a stop and search in 2019, costing him 5 years of his life. The bull had walked into the china shop, and here he was the china. There were no words spoken. No threats were shouted. The silence was far more terrifying. Sterling backed up against the gate, pounding on it, screaming for the guard. But the guard station was empty. The officer on duty was on a break. Sterling lasted exactly 6 minutes. It wasn't a riot, it was a correction, a localized, efficient burst of violence. By the time the response team noticed the commotion and swarmed the tier with batons and shields, the debt had been collected. Sterling was found curled in a fetal position near the showers. He had suffered 3 broken ribs, a fractured orbital socket, and his nose, the symbol of his arrogance, was shattered across his face. He was dragged to the infirmary, weeping, begging for protection, offering names, offering anything. He would survive his injuries, but his life as he knew it was over. He was moved to solitary confinement, protective custody in its most extreme form. He would spend the next 10 years of his sentence in a 6x8 concrete box, let out for 1 hour a day into a small cage for air. 23 hours of silence. 23 hours to think about the slap. His personal life evaporated just as quickly. His wife, Martha, unable to bear the public shame and the relentless harassment from the families of Sterling's victims, sold their home in Essex. She moved to a small village in the Scottish Highlands, reverting to her maiden name. She never visited him. The bull was left alone, a broken relic of a corrupt era, terrified of the dark. Meanwhile, back in the borough of Southwark, the atmosphere was not one of vengeance, but of liberation. Nadia King walked out of the courthouse not merely as a member of Parliament, but as a living legend. She had done the impossible. She had fought the law, and for once, the law didn't win. Justice did. The image of her standing over the unconscious Sterling, fists clenched, became an instant icon of resistance. By the next morning, a local street artist had spray-painted a massive mural of the scene on the side of the community centre. It was titled simply, "The Strike." Nadia didn't go to a gala or a press party. She went straight to the safe house. When she walked through the door, Liam was waiting. He looked thinner, exhausted from the stress, but he was free. When he saw her, he broke down. He collapsed into her arms, sobbing. "They blocked the van, Nad," he cried, burying his face in her shoulder. "I saw it on the news. The people, they blocked the van for me." Nadia held him tight, tears streaming down her own face, washing away the war paint of the last few weeks. "They blocked it for us, Liam," she whispered. "Because we stood up. Because we didn't blink." The ripple effects of her victory were profound. Sarah O'Connell, the journalist who had risked everything to bring the ghost file to court, published the full dossier the following Sunday. It was a bombshell. The detailed records of corruption led to the immediate reopening of over 150 criminal cases. 42 officers were suspended pending investigation. The specialized task force that had terrorized the borough, the Bulls Squad, was permanently disbanded. Nadia leveraged her massive surge in political capital to drive real change. She drafted and pushed through the Sterling Act, a groundbreaking piece of legislation. It mandated that police body cameras be live-streamed to a secure, independent server that no officer or precinct captain could access, edit, or delete. It ended the era of lost footage overnight. 6 months later, Nadia King stood on the stage of a town hall meeting in Southwark. The room was packed to capacity, spilling out into the streets. The mood was celebratory, hopeful. During the Q&A session, a young girl, no older than 10, stood up. She was nervous, clutching a microphone with both hands. "Ms. King," the girl asked, her voice trembling, "were you scared? When he hit you? Were you scared?" Nadia smiled, a warm, genuine expression that softened her sharp features. She unconsciously touched her cheek, where a faint, almost invisible scar still remained, a permanent reminder of the price of standing tall. "I was terrified," Nadia admitted, her voice projecting to the back of the room without wavering. "Fear is natural. It's human. But you have to remember one thing. She looked out at the faces in the crowd. She saw Toby Finch, the paralegal who had leaked the video, now working as a junior associate in Simon Cross's firm. She saw Chaos, the rapper who had rallied the streets. She saw Sarah O'Connell in the press pit. And she saw thousands of ordinary people who had found their voice. A bully only has power if you give it to him, Nadia said. They rely on your silence. They rely on your fear. But the moment you realize that their strength is a lie, that is the moment you win. He slapped me thinking I would break. He thought I was glass. But he forgot that iron doesn't break. It strikes back. The applause that followed was deafening, a roar of approval that seemed loud enough to carry across the city, over the river, and through the thick, lonely walls of HMP Belmarsh, where a man who once thought he was a god now sat in silence, listening to the world move on without him. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how MP Nadia King turned a moment of public humiliation into a revolution. It is a brutal, necessary reminder that authority without accountability is nothing more than tyranny, and that even the thickest blue wall is made of glass, waiting for the right stone to shatter it. Derek Sterling believed his badge gave him the right to be a monster. He learned, in the hardest way possible, that in the court of real justice, the gavel hits back. Karma didn't just knock on his door, it kicked it down and dragged him out. If this story of justice, resilience, and ultimate karma resonated with you, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us uncover and share more incredible stories like this one. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Sterling's punishment in general population was fair, or did the system fail by not protecting him? Let's get a debate going below.